I don't think that AI will replace people or jobs. I think AI will replace tasks or parts of jobs. And I think just like this is true of all technology. I think AI is not different than any other advanced technology that we've had. It's just what's currently the frontier.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. Thanks again for making this one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you enjoy what we do, please like, comment, and share in your favorite podcast app. And we'll keep sharing great conversations like the one we have for today. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. I'm also an investor and an advisor to more than 30 AI-first companies, and as you know, a firm believer in the power of technology to make humans better. If you're passionate about changing the world with AI, or maybe just ready for your next adventure, let's talk. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly on this show, and the added bonus is you get one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact. Eliezer Yudkowsky, who is widely regarded as the founder of the anti-AGI, or artificial general intelligence movement, writes in Time magazine that pausing AI developments isn't enough. We need to shut it all down. Eliezer has been a lightning rod for controversy in the past and is again in this article. He argues that nobody, including AI researchers, knows what will happen when AI develops superhuman intelligence. His thesis is that the obvious thing that will happen is that everyone on Earth will die. I'll let you ponder that one and digest the rest of his rant on your own. Like Jan LeCun, I believe if we're smart enough to create superhuman bots, we are also smart enough to prevent them from destroying humanity. And as always, we'll link to the full article in today's show notes. Now, shifting to this week's conversation, we've had interesting conversations about remote first work with some real pioneers in the space, leaders like Jordan Husney, Parable CEO, and Darren Murph, who at the time was the global head of remote work at GitLab. Well, today's guest has been building a platform to make distributed teams productive since long before it was fashionable. Adam Nathan founded Almanac in January of 2019 to challenge incumbents like Microsoft Office and Google's G Suite. Since then, he and the team have enabled organizations like Cisco, Credit Karma, and ByteDance to collaborate in shared workspaces. Adam has raised more than $40 million to date across 2 rounds from a legendary group of investors that includes Floodgate, Tiger Global, and General Catalyst. Prior to Almanac, Adam did his undergrad at Duke and received his MBA from Harvard. He's also an active volunteer for the Salvation Army. And without further ado, Adam, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast. Let's get started by having you share a bit more about your background and why you got into this space.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Dan. It's a real pleasure to be on. As you mentioned, Almanac is a wiki and workflow tool that makes distributed teams faster. And to date, we've saved remote teams over 1 million hours in wasted work each year with fewer meetings and faster responses and less overhead. And to answer your question, I started the company not really to build a tool for distributed teams, but because in my own journey, I was spending a lot of time at work on things that didn't feel like work. For the 8 years before Almanac, I was a product manager at companies like Apple and Lyft and Varo. And even though the job and my job description was to spend my days building products people loved, what I actually was doing is sitting in often back-to-back meetings, surreptitiously trying to answer a nonstop avalanche of notifications on Slack and on email, all the while basically just trying to get simple answers to simple questions like, did my boss read the document I sent? And what did my team think of the idea? And did I get, approvals to move forward on projects? And my weeks often felt like pushing a ball through mud, like a lot of activity, but very little forward progress. And I had this contrast with the engineers I worked with who used a tool called GitHub, which is basically a platform for collaborating asynchronously on code. And unlike my days, the engineers on my team moved a lot faster, were much more productive, and seemingly were happier at the same time. So I started wondering, what was it about how engineers worked and collaborated that was so much better, so much faster than how knowledge workers and business professionals did, and that led to Almanac.
So many organizations have tried to get remote first work and they've failed. You're probably seeing it more than just about anyone else from the ground floor. What do most companies get wrong? Why does it seem so easy and why can nobody seem to get it right?
Yeah, well, remote isn't a place. It's kind of in this dichotomy that's been set up in the news media about remote versus office. I think it's basically a false choice because remote isn't a place. It's an absence of one. And when you don't have an office, you lose all the kind of theater-based nature of how work has come to be. And I think remote exposes how teams really work. And some teams that were already well managed before are able to go faster because they don't have all the overhead of the office. But a lot of teams, I think, saw just how dysfunctional they really were. And I think managers and leaders in those settings had two choices. One, they could ignore it and try and cover it up and just say, let's go back to the office, or they could work to make it better. And so I think it's not that remote is worse than the office. It's just that teams in an office before weren't really working very well. And remote just showed them what reality, what truth really was. And I think for teams that want to work well, whether in an office or remotely, the single most important thing that they can do is to add structure to how they work. Structure can come in the form of templates, making roles clear around who does what in a process, laying out the steps of a process, including where decisions are. A lot of this is just like basic business management. But it's startlingly absent from most teams. I think, especially in tech, maybe brought on by Google, there's this kind of vibe of let's just get smart people in a room and let's just do stuff together. And maybe we'll find a breakthrough technology. And I think that works every once in a while. But I think the best way to achieve results quickly is to add in structure. There's a saying in the Marines, slow means smooth, smooth means fast. And I think what that often refers to is the idea that if you know what you're doing, you will end up achieving that result much better than if you just try and wing it. And so I think a second part to what makes teams move faster is transparency. People need to know where things are, what their role is, what the status is of what other people are doing on the team. And I think when there is transparency in how teams work and collaborate, people can move faster with fewer messages and fewer meetings.
So I got to challenge you a little bit on that. In kind of like the popular zeitgeist, it feels like meet has become a four-letter word. And you get these high-profile examples of like Shopify adding a little G Suite integration that quantifies the cost of a meeting based on your salaries and time in the meeting and that sort of thing. And so I feel like a lot of executives are all riled up about, the future of meetings is no meetings. And without editorializing too much, I'd love to get your feedback on, is that the right extreme, or like, where do we land eventually on what it means to meet?
Yeah, well, I think when people say they hate meetings, I think what they're really saying is they hate bad meetings. Meetings are expensive, and I think they're often overused. And so I think the idea of Shopify adding a calculator is a great idea to help people consider, do we really need to meet right now? And if we do need to meet, how do we get the most out of our time? I think meetings are often really essential for complex topics that don't have easy yes or no answers. I think conversely, I think you don't need meetings for things that can be done asynchronously, like, do you approve this document, or have you read this, or did you understand this update? A lot of those things can be done without meetings. And I think Shopify is trying to reduce the amount of wasted time on things that can be done much faster in a document. But I think if you do need to have a meeting, the trick is to plan them intentionally. So obvious things like having a goal to the meeting, knowing what you're trying to decide in the meeting, bringing an agenda to the meeting, and then documenting what happens, because often not everybody can be in the meeting. Even if you are, you may be distracted or forget. And so documenting what happens enables people in the future to get the same value out of the meeting as those who are participating, and then move a lot faster. And so, we've all been in lots of meetings that were just poorly planned and chaotic and unintentional. And so even things like brainstorming, I think people bring up things like, creative tasks like brainstorming as like, oh, we need to meet all the time. And I've been in some terrible in-person brainstorms where it wasn't clear what we were solving. The loudest voice dominated the room. We left without any decisions or next steps. And so even in times when you need to meet in person, bringing that intentionality, that structure, and that transparency to a meeting can make it worth your while.
We talk a lot on this podcast about a not too distant future where your colleague is a bot and anything that's kind of routine is being done by a machine, routine or predictable. But anything that requires human judgment, rational thinking, empathy, is better left to humans. What do you think about a time when ad hoc teams are composed both of humans and machines? What does that mean for meeting culture?
That's a great question. Well, I don't think that AI will replace people or jobs. I think AI will replace tasks or parts of jobs. And I think just like this is true of all technology. I think AI is not different than any other advanced technology that we've had. It's just what's currently the frontier. And I think where we're starting with AI is, replacing tasks that are repetitive and solvable by a computer or by code, not the kind of empathetic, creative collaboration that I think humans are best at, and I think we will remain best at for a very long time. And so I think there's a difference in my mind between collaboration and productivity. I think AI will make us more productive, will make us faster, because it will remove or speed up steps that shouldn't take the amount of time they do today for humans to do. But I think will remain or become even more important is that type of creative collaboration that I think only humans can do together. And so I think it will accentuate the best of both worlds, where we will have more time to do the kind of work that only we're able to do as humans, but we'll also be able to move faster on everything we have to do together.
Trust is such a foundational component of relationships and certainly healthy organizational cultures. And I'd argue that one of the things that meetings are really good at is using, call it small talk. It is the 1 to 2 minutes of banter at the beginning or the end of a meeting where you get to know your colleagues. And I'd also argue that that's one of the things that's an innate part of a human condition, is that bots have no need for small talk and they don't trust each other and they're not sentient. So when we talk about, stripping away unnecessary meetings and potentially, outsourcing certain tasks to bots, do we risk losing the humanness of organizations and that trusted relationship we have with humans if we go too far in the other direction?
Yeah, well, I think I'd argue that creating connection and relationships that form the foundation of trust and respect between people, that is an essential reason to meet or have in-person time, whether it's on Zoom or if you're physically co-located. So even in a world with fewer meetings, I'd argue that you still need to meet as a team to get to know each other and form those relationships you're talking about. So I don't think that should ever be, sacrificed to speed or technology. At Almanac, we start all of our in-person meetings with a kickoff question. We, I think, have a list of like 2,000 of them at this point. Everything from like, what's your favorite color, to what did you want to be when you were growing up, to what's your perfect Saturday? So questions that have nothing to do with work. And that's just to help us realize that we are all humans and full real people, and we're more than just our jobs or whatever the purpose of that meeting is or whatever we need from each other. And I think that's essential to building a culture of connection and trust. And too often, I think they get sacrificed or forgotten about when teams go remote or become more distributed. I think a lot of companies are bad at it too, to be honest, in person. So again, I don't think that this is just a function of like where your team is located. I think that will continue to be an important, even in a world with bots. There's a lot of companies that have named their like AI products after humans. And I think that's a little bit of a mistake, because I don't think, AI technology is a sentient creature, just like Google Maps isn't. And I think what AI is, again, I think it's just frontier technology. And I think it's something that it's a tool that we can harness to be better and faster at the things we have to do, but it's not like a new member of the team. It's just a better tool.
You started the company in 2019. I don't think you were so prescient as to realize a couple years later what would happen in the field of AI and generative AI, and just how the world would wake up to the potential risks and also opportunities. Talk me through, even over the last 12 months, how has AI, maybe generative AI specifically, changed Adam changed Almanac, your product roadmap, your customers' engagement with the product? Just curious, from one entrepreneur to another, how has it changed the organization?
Yeah, well, I've always thought about AI as an accelerant onto great products. If you see even today, the companies that are so far, I think, getting the most business value out of AI are either platforms with existing distribution, like Microsoft or Google, or even Notion. I think it remains to be seen, but there are fewer examples so far of companies that have built great businesses just off of AI itself. And I think that's because, to date, a lot of companies leverage AI through these open source models. And so it's relatively easy to wrap your product in AI. But the hard part is actually the product underneath. In other words, if you want to build an AI document editor, the hard part is the document editor. It's the real-time collaboration. It's all the editorial elements. It's about security and permissions and document storage and performance. That's the part of most products that takes years to build. And so, wrapping that product with AI makes the product faster and better and more magical. And I think we've seen many cases of that so far. But having a strong product foundation and great distribution is still essential to building a big business. And so that's generally how I look at this technology. It's just it's something that can make your growth faster and your product better. But I don't think there's been as many examples so far of companies thriving into a growth stage status just on AI itself. I think a couple of amazing things that AI had done for us at Almanac, maybe three things. One is it's taken what today is a multiplayer product and turned it into a single player one. So Almanac is a collaboration platform, and to really get the most value out of some of our best features around version control or approvals or tasks or comments, you need to bring all your team onto Almanac. You need to bring all your docs onto Almanac, and really be using it every day. And of course, we have hundreds of companies that use it that way, but it's a pretty long funnel for us. It requires a lot of time and often investment on the company's part. With AI, now you can use Almanac and all of our best features without having the rest of your team there. So now AI and Almanac can redline your document for you. It can mark it up with comments on your style or your syntax or your tone. It can prepare your document for export to a different tool, all things that required humans or the rest of your team to do before. And so it enables people to get a lot more value out of Almanac a lot faster, often in their first session. I also think it improves basically how good the product is on things like comments or red lines. It's not just your boss's best idea. Now Almanac can pull from basically the entire world of edits and texts on the internet to revise your document for you and get it into the best shape possible. And I think the third thing from a business perspective is reshape the landscape. Before we were competing against really entrenched incumbents like Google Docs or Microsoft Word, even products that are maybe a decade ahead of us in the startup space like Notion or Coda. And it feels like a snow has fallen over the landscape, where now many companies have an opportunity to build a standard deviation better product than the alternatives, even faster than the incumbents. And so I think it's scrambling the landscape, and lots of people are looking for the very best tools, basically around the same jobs to be done that have existed for 30 years or 300 years, but with a very new set of challengers to add some alternatives for consumers.
I like how you describe the added value of AI from the perspective of a product manager. I look at what Microsoft just announced, to add $30 per month, 30 to 40% increase for a feature. A very powerful feature, but a feature whose utility is yet unknown. When you think about if you have to quantify the value of these new features for your customers at Almanac, is the Microsoft, can we get away with charging 30 to 40% more for a feature? Or is there something I'm missing about how we're going to manage to quantify the value and the market will accept that increase?
Yeah, I don't think that the prices you see are a reflection of the customer value they create. I think they're a reflection of the cost of producing the AI feature. Models like OpenAI are actually very expensive, several cents per word. And so I think the cost that companies like Microsoft are charging to customers is a reflection of just breaking even on the technology. And I think over time, the cost of these LLMs will go down. But right now they take a tremendous amount of computing power, a tremendous amount of energy to produce even basic things like autocomplete or document generation. And so I think the pricing you see is a reflection of the tremendous cost of delivering AI to consumers. I agree with you. I don't yet know the total value that they'll create. And I don't think we've seen pricing yet that's driven by customer value instead of the cost of AI. I think there's a world where AI-based platforms and products deliver way more than $30 or $40 of value per month if they're making far more accurate, far higher quality documents in this case than what you could do on your own or just with your team. I think we've started to see some good examples of that in the legal space where AI models that are probing from a pretty narrow and deep niche of documents can produce far higher quality legal docs than a team of lawyers ever could, and it can be produced faster and cheaper than, for example, paying a recent graduate from Harvard Law to redline your document. And so I think there's examples in those cases where consumer value will be way greater than what these tools can do today. But I think the pricing we're seeing right now is like early adopter pricing based on what it costs to just serve the feature up to people.
So with traditional software, if the software makes mistakes, we call it a bug. And if the software contains enough bugs in it, we don't pay for it. This is a very different situation where AI-first software routinely makes mistakes. We don't call them bugs. We give it this cute term. We say it hallucinated. That's just a bug in a previous life. It did something that it shouldn't have done. Who is responsible, and how do we think about the quality of software changing, given that we're celebrating the fact that these new capabilities that we're so excited about introduce, let's call them what they are, bugs into software that otherwise, behaved in a predictable way?
That's a great question. I think the way I think about AI today for most use cases is as a fuzzy first draft. Big global LLMs are not pulling from specific deep data sources. They're just scouring the internet essentially to try and probabilistically come up with an answer to your question. And so for most use cases, I think almost all, as far as the products I can see on the market, AI is not producing or even trying to produce a perfect answer that's specific to your question or your need. It's just giving you something to work off of as a starting point. And I think that's why, the best use cases we've seen so far are really around document generation or image generation being the key word there, in that it's a place to start and then refine further on your own. And so I honestly think, and maybe this is a little spicy, that if anyone's just taking the output from AI and saying, oh, this is perfect, and moving on with their lives, they're probably using the technology wrong. I don't think that's what it's designed for. I don't think that's what it can do. I hope, and I think it'd be cool to get to some use cases in the coming years where AI does produce a really precisely good answer. I think that will come around much narrower use cases with much deeper sets of data, where the AI can get to something like, 98, 99% quality. But I don't think that's what that's not how the technology is designed today. That's not how tools are built. And so I think if you're using AI thinking that it's going to get you something that's bug-free, to use your term, you're going in with the wrong expectation.
I thought that collaboration software was pretty mature, maybe naively. And then we've had a series of guests, including this conversation and learning more about Almanac, that made me realize that some of what I thought was pretty mature, whether it's, Office and collaboration capabilities or G Suite, or even, using Slack as kind of the backbone for collaboration, isn't really solving the collaboration problem. Talk us through your approach to Almanac and why you were bold enough, in 2019, right? Like a decade after a bunch of other collaboration suites were really successful, like where you saw a gap in the market.
Yeah, well, I think the fun thing about collaboration and productivity is that there, is no frontier or there's no endpoint. There's always more to optimize. Collaboration is basically just a behavior around how we work together. And I think like any other kinds of behaviors like diet or exercise, nutrition, there's always more you can do. And I think people think that they can always be more organized, always be moving faster, always producing better results or becoming more creative. I think it's just the fundamental dynamic of boundless human potential. And so I think there's always more opportunity in the market. And I think the question is, can you find a step change in collaboration or productivity around the way the product is designed or features in it that kind of elevate what we can all do together. And I think there's been, if you look over time at kind of the most successful products in collaboration, they all stand on each other's shoulders. Microsoft Word basically took a piece of physical paper and put it on a personal computer. Google Docs took that piece of digital paper and put it on the internet. And then we all realized we could work together at the same time on it. Notion, for example, recently, I think combined the idea of a document and a database together. I think what we focused on at Almanac is bringing collaboration next to where you're doing the work. So rather than using other tools like Slack or Zoom or email to get feedback or make decisions or seek approvals, all that in Almanac happens next to the document. And today, because collaboration is separate from productivity, where you're doing the initial work is different from where you're discussing it or deciding on it. Information gets split up between tools, and it requires a lot of manual coordination to manage it. And that takes a lot of people's time. And that's not even something that AI can solve. That's just fundamentally about how we organize ourselves and how we work together and how the tool is designed. And that's what makes GitHub so successful for engineers and what enables them to work a lot faster. And so I think our contribution to the space is really about bringing where you collaborate on work next to where you've created it in the first place. And I don't think it'll stop with us, obviously. I think people will take our ideas and build on them. And I think that's just the magic of technology. And I think that the nature of our industry is to admire and accept other people's ideas and then build on top of them. And so, well, of course, we're all competitive with each other. I think there's a natural spirit of cooperation that's really special and enables us to do things that individually or even as companies we couldn't do on our own.
I got to get you off the hot seat. We're about out of time here, but I want to ask you one last question. So you started the company in 2019, shared your background, first-time CEO. I know personally how the journey can't help but change you as a human. I'd love to know about your personal journey as an entrepreneur. What has it taught you about yourself?
I think that I have a lot more grit and persistence than I thought I did. Starting a company it's a 10-year commitment, at least if you're successful. And the more successful you are, the harder it gets. And so I think about this often as like a 100-mile race, or like trying to climb Mount Everest, where you're on a steep part and you think you can see the ledge up above, and once you get there, then you realize just how much bigger the mountain is, how much more you have to climb. And in my 4 years at Almanac, we've had a bunch of really great successes. We've also had a bunch of big failures. Some of my greatest fears around starting a business have come true, and yet I'm still alive and we're still going. And I think the thread between it all is just to never stop moving and keep putting one foot in front of the other, even when you think you can't, because you can if you're alive and you're breathing. And I think the motivation to keep pushing forward, even when it's really hard, is what separates successful founders from people who don't make it. And so I think it all comes down to grit and persistence, just moving forward, even when you think you can't, even when it's really difficult. And I think that's why the Almanac is where it is today, why I'm here, is because I just didn't stop. And that's the advice I'd give to any founder out there, especially new ones, that it's not about how good the initial idea is or how much money you have or who your team is. It's really about, I think, your personal determination to keep moving forward if you want to see it through.
I love that analogy, that you think you reached a peak and it's really a ledge, and you look over the ledge. I think the test of an entrepreneur is, how do you feel when that happens? Do you feel exasperated because you thought it was the peak? Or do you feel exhilarated because you get to keep climbing?
Yeah.
What has been in your case? Have you said, you found a level of resiliency maybe you didn't think you had. Has that been the case for you?
Definitely. I think the scariest points have been, I call it losing the scent, and to use the mountain metaphor again. And it has felt there have been points in the business where it feels like I'm like wandering, in a foggy forest and I don't know which way to turn. It's often feels that way, I think, in the early days, pre-product market fit, when maybe you're just searching for an idea or trying to validate it with customers. It's a lot scarier when you have investors and a team who are looking to you for direction and you don't know where to go. Those have been some of the darkest days for me at Almanac because I don't have the confidence myself. And so figuring out how to find the scent again, I think, is another true skill of an entrepreneur. And I think for most early stage companies, the fuel of the company is momentum. It's people feeling motivated and inspired and feeling like, oh yes, we are going to make it to the top of the mountain. And I think those companies die when people get tired and when they want to go do something that's new and exciting and gives them fresh energy. And so I think when you lose the scent, the trick is finding it again or finding a direction before everybody gets too tired and burnt out. And so I think those moments have been when I felt, I don't even know if exasperated is the right word, but just scared and tired and not knowing if we're going to make it. Almost always, I think, when we reach, if you're climbing up a hill, just having a path, any path, I think is better than having no path, because you can then validate it or falsify it and then make the right turn. And I think excellence often comes from iteration and just being able to get a lot of ideas out there as fast as possible and then get feedback on them from whoever the critical stakeholder is on the other side. Often it's customers and users, but getting any data or feedback is useful. And I think I always feel exhilarated or energized when I'm getting feedback, whether it's positive or negative, whether it validates or falsifies my initial hypothesis, because it helps me understand and feel confident in where we're going. And I think this is so cheesy, but it is about the journey. It's about making that forward progress that is really at the heart of, I think, why people start companies and why they do things. It's just to see if you can. And so I never assume that any particular ledge or peak is the final one, but I think I get a lot of value and satisfaction every day about just feeling like we're pushing the needle and making progress. And I think that's true of not just founders. I think it's true of anyone who works. I think satisfaction comes from ending your week feeling like you got stuff done and that you move the needle on whatever it is that's important to you.
Excellence comes from iteration. I like that. And I like how you described the pursuit. It's raw. It's very human. We're all humans first. And sometimes because you know that your team is looking to you to be not vulnerable and, to be the one who doesn't lose the scent, it can feel like a lot of responsibility and it can feel very lonely at times. But I think you have the right attitude about, feeling like it is part of the journey, and it's the ability to celebrate the journey that separates the best entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I think that anyone has hiked or climbed mountains before, I think the peak is often almost a deflating experience. Like, is that it? And even when I've climbed very big mountains, like I don't spend a lot of time on the peak. You look around, you take a couple of photos, you eat a snack bar, and then you start going down again. And I think I've read that founders that have exited often feel a sense of, I think, purposelessness or ennui when they sell their company, because they don't have that motivating force anymore to just keep going. And I think that's true for a lot of people who are working towards a goal or something really big. It's not really about the destination or the triumph at the end. It's about seeing what we can do individually and as a team. And I think that's what makes technology so exciting as an industry, or even just using it, because seeing what you can create, seeing what other people have created, I think expands our sense of what's possible for ourselves. And, to your point, technology is, especially with AI, it's not about the technology, it's about what we as humans can do with it.
Adam, we've gone way off script and way over time, but I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah.
Before I can let you go, where can the audience learn more about you and the work of Almanac?
Yeah. So if you're interested in a better way to work, check us out at almanac.io. And I'm on Twitter or whatever it's called these days, and LinkedIn. I think my DMs are open, so we'd love to hear from you.
Brilliant. Adam, thanks for hanging out. I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan.
Well, gosh, that's a wrap for this week on AI and the future of work. Of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.